This is an interview on the 29th of January 2005 with Sergeant Albert Thomas Fry, known as Bert, V42487, VX141616, 39th Battalion, E Machine Gun Company, 19 Platoon. Well, Bert, very first question is, how did you join the Army?
It was in Ararat. My elder brother, was in the Army, up there in the militia. I had just finished school at the end of 1938, and I was waiting an appointment, which I knew was going to come as a school teacher. And I was pretty bored. I didn't have much to do, and I went along to parade with him one night, and somebody said, do you want to join the Army, Bert? And I thought, oh, yeah, why not? So I said, yeah, fair enough. So that very same night I was hustled off to the Army medical officer who examined me and said, part of his report was, this person has seriously flat feet. He is not suitable for Army life as an infantryman. With that, I was immediately posted to the 8th Battalion as an infantry. And that's how I joined the Army. I was just 16 and 4 months or something at that stage.
So where were you camped?
I never went to camp with the 18th Battalion. Shortly after I joined up, and having had only a few parades with the 8th Battalion in Ararat, I got a job as a school teacher in Springvale in Melbourne. And I thought, oh, I can't do all this work, Army and school. So I went along to the bloke in charge at Ararat, captain I think he was, and I said to him, I want to get out of the Army. He said, you can't do that, you're in the Army and that's where you bloody well stay. You see, or words to that effect. So I said, oh. So I went down there and stayed at Springvale and was quite happy teaching there until I got a letter from the 52nd Battalion, which was in Dandenong. You have been transferred from the 8th Battalion, report on such and such a night at such and such a time, which I did. And when I got there, I tried the same ploy. I said to a bloke whom I later recognised as Captain Merritt, said, I want to get out of the Army. And he said, you're bloody well in at the stage, brother. And I just went on from there.
So you were camped at Dandenong or?
Where did I camp? No, we were camped at Trail. Yeah, this was with the 52nd Battalion, at Trail. That's between Tallarook and Seymour, at the foot of the mountains.
So as a 16-year-old, what sort of training did you have and what was your main job?
I did everything, I think, that the other 7 fellas in the tent said I should do. I was pretty young and I was fit and young, I didn't mind much. But I didn't have any real training. In fact, I hated the Army, absolutely hated it, and that's why I tried all avenues to get out, but none of them were successful. But I did a bit of training on the Vickers machine gun, which I thought was fabulous, but generally I hated the Army.
So I believe they elected you as messenger boy.
Oh yeah, I became a messenger. In those days, it wasn't everybody that was fortunate enough to have the HSC or whatever it was in those days. I was one of those fortunate ones, and because of that, or because they reckoned I was no good as a private, they made me a Lance Corporal. And I became the company orderly. And that's supposed to mean that he's the next big thing, you know, in the NCO stakes. And I became an orderly, company orderly. This is still in the 52nd Battalion. And we had huge horses that I, as an orderly, was expected to ride. And I didn't like horses very much. I couldn't control them. They just used to go where they wanted to. And all they wanted to do was go back to their lines and eat. So that was no good. They made me a dismounted orderly and gave me a push bike, an old Massey Harris or some sort of, heavy as hell it was. And I used to dive around the battalion lines and occasionally to another battalion to deliver a message, most of which I think I got right. And And I was made a corporal, which I thought was good, you know. And I was up the big day then, about 6 shillings a day, I think. But I still wasn't very good. I had one memorable message that I had to deliver to brigade headquarters. And what the hell brigade headquarters was, I don't know. I'd never heard of brigade headquarters except somebody set us down the road. This is night time. Just get on your bike and light your acetylene lamp and go down the road until you hit brigade headquarters. They gave me this message and put it in a pouch, and I had to strap it on to do something with it. And away I went down the road. It was an unsealed road in those days, and I got halfway there and I'm bouncing up and down, and suddenly the light exploded, just went poof, like that. And I went poof, head over heels off the bloody bike in the middle of the road, and I'm alight and it's alight and the grass is alight. Everything's alight, so I got it all out by various methods, and I thought, what do I do now? So off I went and trudged down the road and went to, I knew the brigade headquarters was in a house. So I came to a house and I wandered up the driveway looking for brigade headquarters to deliver this message. And the first thing I know, I'm confronted by a gate with a ruddy great dog on the other side, and I'm barging his head off. So dark as that. So I backtracked from there. I reckon brigade headquarters was not made of dogs. So I went along a bit further, found another house, and eventually I found brigade headquarters. And probably the nicest major, as I discovered he was later on, in the army, grabbed hold of me and said, "What's the matter, son?" I said, "Well, I've done all those dreadful things, fallen off and not so. And here's your message, sir." He said, "Oh, it's not very important anyway," which I thought was a bit of a bummer. So he gave me a cup of tea and somehow got me back to my own lines. But that was my message. And I was never very good at being an orderly anyway.
Did you have a nickname at the time?
Oh, yeah, Frizzle.
And how did you get that?
Oh, I think it was just a make-up of my surname Fry. It's one of the reasons I joined the army, to get away from these characters who used to call me Frizz.
And who was your commanding officer at the time?
In the 52nd?
In the 52nd.
Oh, I think the commanding officer was a fellow by the name of Simons, Colonel Simons. I know him, company... Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Company commander was Major Mollard, who was a designer of ladies' clothing, and who did very well in the 22nd at Rebel later on. And my immediate machine gun commander was Captain William Gerard Thomas Merritt. I still added the army, but I used to get various jobs and do a bit of training and started to get a bit good with the machine gun. So
how long was it till you joined the 39th Battalion, and did you volunteer?
Oh yes. As I thought I recalled, a thing came around, probably delivered by some silly young joke on a bike, that they were the army was looking to form a volunteer battalion, a garrison battalion, for what I thought was Darwin. And I'd never been beyond the Murray, never been to the Murray at this stage of my life, and I thought, oh, that sounds good. So I volunteered, and that was easy. Another reason I volunteered was in those days, in the 52nd, I anyway wore breeches and puttees. And they were dreadful things, you know, in hot weather at Ngambie Road and trail. They were dreadful things, tying these puttees around your legs, nearly choked you. And we used to have a uniform with red piping, I think it was, unit colour patches on a green background on our thing. The colour patch for the 52nd was white over blue circle, and the badge was gum leaves surrounding a shield, and the motto was "Always Ready." The Gippsland Regiment, always ready. And this was a bit contrary to what was going on, ran against the sort of feeling between the CMF and the militia, the chocos as they were, and the RF. So if you joined the 39th, we knew you'd get a a Rising Sun badge and a proper AIF type uniform, which in due course we all got.
Did any of your mates go with you to the 39th from the 50? Did any of your mates from the 52nd go with you?
Oh, yeah, well, no, not many from the 52nd, but I made some really good mates in the 39th too, in particular Russell Rosengren from the 14th Battalion and Ned Bryan from the 5760th, and we were good mates. We eventually became, in the 2nd 8th Battalion, a long way ahead, the best machine gun crew in the 6th Division, according to the results of the sporting procedure. Now, 2nd 6th Battalion might disagree with it.
So do you remember changing camps and going to the camp at Darley where the 39th was
yeah,
based?
Sure. We were formed up, we were declared a battalion at the Caulfield Racecourse. And then somehow we got to Darley. We didn't walk, we must have gone by train, and marched all the way out to Darley. And it didn't take long before we were formed up into companies and platoons, and we were in huts. And eventually we did a big exercise around Cressy and whatnot. What the hell name?
Was it Karangamite?
Battle of Karangamite, that's right. And that was useless.
What do you remember about that?
Oh, riding around the country like nongs on trucks and hanging out of car doors and that sort of business. Didn't see an enemy and didn't even take over the post office at Cressy.
What sort of ammunition did you have or equipment?
Oh, hell, didn't have any ammunition. We wouldn't have known what to do with it much anyway. We had, I suppose, you wouldn't have pouches, the basic pouches and rifles and that sort of stuff. But it was the start. We got to know one fellow in my section, a fellow by the name of Snowy Wilson. He did all right. He met a girl at Murniong, and she had one brown eye and one blue eye, and that fascinated him, so eventually he married her. So I thought that was some positive result, the only one I know of, in the Battle of Karangamite.
Did you think that you'd be going overseas?
Oh, well, that's what by this time I'd been enlightened to the fact that it was Port Moresby or New Guinea we were going. Oh, yes, we knew about it at this time.
And did your training increase? Did you have any sort of proper training?
Oh, I can't remember any detailed training. There obviously was a bit, but we did a bit of gun drill and that sort of stuff. What the infantry blokes were doing, I don't know, but we didn't have any really specialist
What
training.
rank were you then?
I was a sergeant.
You're still a sergeant?
Yeah. I was instructing the other blokes, and I didn't know much, so that's the sort of training they were getting. But we were learning all the time, and we're starting to sort out who was who. Some people slotted into the more important positions, and other people didn't quite measure up to what you'd expected. Yeah, we did pretty well. Scared hell out of us when a platoon from the 2nd 5th Battalion, or 5th Battalion, VSR, marched in their kilts and all that sort of stuff. We thought we were in the wrong district, but we were right. That turned out all right.
Do you remember when you had word that you would be heading overseas and there was a street parade in Melbourne?
Yep.
You remember that?
I do. Yeah, that was good. We marched in shorts and shirts to attention all the way, and I'm not familiar which way. We came down Swanson Street, and there were a lot of people there, and we were going all right behind some sort of man. And then we went over the bridge and turned down what must have been the road that runs alongside the Yarra. And there were factories, biscuit factories there, and a lot of ladies came. And as we were in shorts and shirts, we got really carried away. They come out and gave us biscuits and patted our legs and that sort of stuff. And I thought, this army's all right. It didn't last for long.
It wasn't long after that, probably 6 weeks or so, that you were told you'd be heading off to go to Port Moresby. Do you remember the journey up to Sydney?
Oh, we had a fantastic journey. We went by train to Sydney and changed in the middle of the night at Albury, which was a bit of a nuisance, but it was a good training run for all the train rides we had later on, with plenty of people in each compartment and all that sort of jazz. But when we got to Sydney, the whole battalion was stuck on a ferry and shoved across the Aquitania, where we embarked without any to do, and watched the poor old 53rd Battalion get shanghaied aboard and that sort of stuff. But we were, and the girls over in the thing waving handkerchiefs, or what polite people call the handkerchiefs, I don't really know what they were, to the troops, which was good. And then away we went in the Aquitania.
And how did you feel when you were heading off?
Oh, good.
Excitement as going on a voyage overseas. And what were your expectations? What did you think it was going to be like when you got there?
Well, our expectations were fairly high because we'd been told to take sporting equipment and all this sort of stuff, you see, which very few of us had anyway, but some people got golf clubs and tennis rackets and that sort of stuff. They didn't get much use in Port Moresby.
No, you didn't really think you would have to go into battle.
No, well, we didn't know that the Japanese were about to knock off Rabaul and that sort of business, and they were starting to get a bit close then to Port Moresby, and the indications were that they were coming to get us next. So suddenly it became a serious sort of venture, which didn't prevent the companies, the various companies, including mine, from being allocated to boat loading things. The 49th Battalion were there when we got there. They were Queensland unit, and they looked totally troppo. And I think they were. They'd been a bit shell-shocked by a long stay up at Port Moresby and doing nothing but manual labour, and they looked troppo. Eventually, we were considered to look exactly as troppo as the 49th by people later than us, which was very rude of them. What was I talking about?
Just retracking a bit, what did you remember of the voyage across on the Aquitania?
Oh, we had a fantastic voyage. We were machine gunners, and we had our guns mounted in at Aquitania up on the top deck.
So you were in the best,
we were there. We were right on the word go. We were up on the top deck. We had our eye on everything. As the ship was still under civilian command, and as a sergeant, as all sergeants did, I lived in a four berth cabin.
Do you remember who you shared your cabin with?
Oh, I don't know now.
You don't remember?
But another three blokes. And we lived in the tourist mess, and this was fantastic. Beautiful meals, and the officers were in the higher class mess, and the troops, they did all right, but it was an enormous ship. The Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth were in harbour at the same time. Anyway, we got there, and we had an uneventful voyage. We didn't have to shoot down any aeroplanes. All we did was, we had a couple of practice shots. We were sitting up on one of those round parts of the boat, and look over the side, and there was a little sort of hideaway down there where the officers and the nursing sisters used to congregate. And we used to play eye drop with the spent shells. I don't know whether anyone we know was involved in that, but it was good. I enjoyed it. So did we.
When you got closer to Port Moresby, did you have any expectations of what it would be like? And did you have a sense of that you may be going into action, or did you think you would just be going over there to do garrison duty?
Well, my own thought was that my own expectations were virtually nil. I was always a fairly pragmatic fellow, and what happens, happens, as far as I'm concerned. I guess it was not long, we were not long there before the expectation that we would one day have to do something about these Japanese people struck everybody, because they were at battle and they were coming out of both sides. And obviously they were headed for Port Moresby with a view to knocking off Australia. So there was an expectation of some urgency, but again, it didn't affect the training schedule to any great extent.
What happened when the ship landed at Port Moresby, and do you remember unloading and where you went?
Oh, yeah, we unloaded all right. We enormous thing couldn't get into the jetty there, so we transposed into a little craft at the bottom of this enormous ship, which was a scary enough thing anyway. And we got there and eventually formed up rackets and golf clubs and all, and said, well, you've only got a little mast to your thing. And up the hill we went over to 7 miles it cost. When we got there, it was as dark as the black cat. And said, well, here you are. And we were just told to go to sleep, and that was it.
And what was it like? Describe the area and what was there and what wasn't there?
Well, there was nothing there except a few trees and 40 million mosquitoes, and one water point, as I recall, to serve the whole battalion and all the troops that were in the vicinity. The 53rd were somewhere around, and the 49th, they would have been down because they were ubiquitous. But there was nothing there, and the stuff that we really wanted, like mosquito nets and repellents and mosquito medicine, were all at the bottom of the holes in the Aquitania. Somebody had mixed it up. And it was 3 or 4 days before this unloading schmozzle was sorted out and we got any sort of supplies at all, including food. So
what was your very first job?
Probably digging a latrine, which was a very necessary one, because immediately that we got there and there was this great milling around of people and no real facilities, dysentery started, all the tropical things started, and they were very awful things. So digging latrines became a high priority and an important job.
Do you remember at the time who some of your mates were?
Yeah, well, this time I'd mated up with Rosengren, Russell, Rosie, it was always called, and Ned Bryant, who was an absolute bush ranger from up Shepparton way. But work, they were frightening just to watch. They worked so hard. And we were good mates. We weren't all in the same platoon. Ned was one of my section commanders. I had 2 guns. He commanded one of the guns. And Rosie was in another platoon. But we were good mates, and we used to make the best of it, as much as we could.
You'd been in a tent by this stage?
Oh, no. Oh,
Still
no.
just on the ground?
Just on the ground. I can't even recall whether we had mosquito nets at this stage. There's some weeks after. I don't know. I know the first mosquito net I got issued with was a beautiful white silk one. Absolutely beautiful thing. It probably come from Burns Phillips store. Somebody pinched it. But it didn't last too long. Mosquitoes used to eat it, I think.
Do you remember much about your camp? The cookhouse and just the general duties?
No, I don't. I don't. There were no messes per se. There must have been a cook. No sergeant's mess or officer's mess in the companies, or as far as I know, in the battalion. I never saw one anyway. And it was just a matter of line up at the cookhouse. So I presume there was some sort of protection for the fly protection for the cookhouse, and we'd line up with our dixies. And there wasn't much to cook, of course. Basic food was bully beef in various infinite varieties, and bully beef and dog biscuits, which is sustainable, but it gets a bit boring after a while. But no, I don't recall those things. If again, it pays, I think, to be a bit of a pragmatist. You don't worry about too many things. I had plenty of other things to worry about.
Did you actually start doing any training?
I don't really recall ever doing any proper training in New Guinea. Certainly not with the infantry companies. None whatsoever. I may have done it, but I don't believe so.
How did you spend your days?
Oh, well, we were posted digging in the main or unloading vessels. The time was coming when air action over a 7-mile drone was intensifying, and as machine gunners, and with the rest of the machine gunners up there, we were posted in various places around the aerodrome to combat the Japanese Zeros that used to come in and starve hell out of us every now and again.
So what do you remember about the first bombing raids by the Japanese? How did you feel?
Where did we feel? Oh, they were so high, you reckon, just little twinkly little things up there, you reckon they couldn't hurt anybody. But we were at Bootless Bay, and the other sergeant in the platoon, a fellow by the name of Fred Woods, who was a great big bloke. He had a mobile portable air thing, air raid siren, you see, and we got word. We must have heard the radio. We got the telephone. We got word that the bombers were coming, and where we were at Bootless, they used to come in over our positions towards Port Moresby. And the first raid we got, we all galloped outside and looked for slit fences, which we must have ducked. And Fred Wood there, he's got this mobile thing, and he's given a little bit of a word going, roo, roo, roo. Somebody said to him, turn it up a bit, Fred. He said, I can't make it too loud, the buggers will hear it. Which was, we thought, a bit strange. But they went on and bombed Moresby and then came back and flew around us. And that went, I think, 59, 58 or some times it happened. But Freddie never learned to wind up the jigger.
Did you put any more defences in place?
Yeah, we were eventually sent down to do a proper job of a defensive position at Bootless Bay, or part of Bootless Bay, where there was one residence. That was a two-storey house, and it was occupied by a Chinese Motuan businessman in Port Moresby, and we got to know him very well. And he used to provide us with beer. We'd go down into his house after knocking off whenever, and he'd invite us in. We'd drink Melbourne beer in the top story because the bottom story had too much smoke in it. Anyway, we had to put a defensive position in the mangroves, looking out across the thing and wire it all up, and that took us quite a long time, and eventually. The Coral Sea battle started to form itself, and well, an interesting thing, that story there, position. There was a beer ration that had been started in Moresby, and beer, whiskey, and I'm not quite sure what the officers got, but it was something a bit more potent, sounds like Glenfiddich or something like that. That they used to save up and have a bit of a party. By this time we'd been joined by C Company somewhere over there, and I think they'd established a bit of a two-company mess. I don't know. Anyway, they got together this night and decided to drink all their beer or wine or whatever, and our platoon commander, my platoon commander, Ted Money, who was a lovely bloke and we got on very well, he went over there and someone brought him home about up past midnight, I think, and just put him on his bed. He was as drunk as a skunk, drunk as a monkey. And then before I knew I could do anything about that, our company commander then was a fellow by the name of John Barrow, an ex-English officer. He came thundering across and said, where's Mr. Money? I said, he's in his bed, sir, he's not too well. And John Barrow went charging in there, and here's Ted, as drunk as a monkey, looking after him. Come on, Mr. Money, get out! And they were out on a little grassy knoll, bright moonlight. Ted's as naked as the day he's born, slapping mosquitoes. And John Barrow's growling at him and said, you've no hope tonight, go back to bed. Bert, you get your troops organised on your guns. So that was a bit of a panic, and we got all organised, and we sat there all night waiting for the sounds of things to come, but nothing came. Next morning, we were told to stand down, and we had about a quarter of a mile, I suppose, from our camp to the gunners. We were going anyway, and that was across an open kunai patch. And as we were crossing that, a flight of 3 Zeros came in across the water, Norway, and they just waggled their wings to us and on their way. Went to see what damage happened. But that was all we knew of the Coral Sea battle. It was interesting, but Ted was not too well that night.
Did you remember when the 75th Kitty Hawk Squadron arrived in Port Moresby?
I thought it was 75.
Oh, 75th, yeah, 75. Yeah.
Oh, we'd been getting harassed by these Zeros all the time. They used to come in, swoop down the valley and come in along the length of the 7-mile drone, and we'd try and shoot them down. We did, in fact, shoot 3 down, Zeros, but we were getting a bit jack of. Everybody was getting a bit jack of, them doing all the shooting, and we just taking all the good stuff they sent us. And we got the news that the Kitty Hawks were coming. The Kitty Hawks were coming. Oh, yeah. And the Zeros continued to come in, no Kitty Hawks, so they became Tomorrow Hawks because they're coming tomorrow. And the Zeros continued to come in, and the Tomorrow Hawks didn't come, so they became the Never Hawks. And one day we're standing there, here comes the Zeros, we said, and they come charging up the valley. And we got 3 of them. They were Never Hawks. There's only one out of a flight of 8, I think it was, that came in that could take the air to knock off a Japanese recce plane that came in immediately after them. But the 75 Squadron, Squadron Leader Jackson was the commanding officer. They did marvellously well. I couldn't compare with the Zero for manoeuvrability and that sort of business, but they did a hell of a good job. Yeah, that was the first plane we'd seen shot down over. We shot up 2. We had about 50 machine guns for anything, and officially credited in one of the books I've read, 3 Kitty Hawks, 3 Zeros, and a Fortress, Flying Fortress. We knocked that off. So we had a mixed crew. Yeah.
Do you remember much about the any entertainment that you had or what you did at night?
We had no entertainment. No, I don't remember what we did. We played a lot of chess, but we didn't have much light. And kerosene was a bit hard to come by, and candles, we used to use candles. I don't know where they came from.
You play cards?
Yeah, we used to play cards. Bridge, we were into all the top shelf stuff. You could play that game for days, and cribbage and that sort of stuff. No, I don't remember what we did.
Do you remember getting parcels from home and letters from home?
Oh yeah, the mail system was not too bad. A lot of the parcels we got were destroyed by the tropical conditions. People hadn't sort of worked out at this stage how to pack things so that they wouldn't be affected by the humidity and that sort of. Yeah, we did all right. Yeah, we used to get occasional things from Port Moresby. Burns Philp in the early stages was still going. The big store there was going. And,
did you go into Port Moresby very often?
No, I didn't get into Port Moresby. We were going one morning at the command of Major Merritt, Captain Merritt, to get a piano. And we were equipped with a 30 hundredweight truck and a series of big strong people to lift it. He said, it's in Burns Philp's store. You'll be able to find it all right. It's totally illegal. But we run along the main road into Port Moresby to get this piano. And the main road also served as the run-on road for the Kitty Hawks going to the drone to take off somewhere. And we're going along this road, and a driver by the name of Jack Payne, he saw this thing looming up out of the dust, out of the dawn, and he thought it was a Zero. So he put his foot down, bang like that, and the old 30-100 went a little bit faster, took the wing right off a Kitty Hawk. Oh, God, what do we do about this? Wonder we didn't get killed, Just pushed the cabin. I was sitting in the cabin, pushed it back over.
Did you get in trouble?
No, I didn't hear another thing about it. Of course, we didn't wait there very long. I turned straight around, went back to Bill Muir and said, look what you've done to us. He said, what happened? So we told him, and I didn't hear any more about it. But I lived in fear and trembling for a while.
Do you remember what happened when the McDewey was bombed?
Oh, yes. I know my platoon commander was killed, and another good friend of mine, Ron Stewart, eventually died, or both died of burns, a few days later. And that was very, very sad. At about the same time as this happened, I think the battalion got a leavening of AIF officers from the 2nd 11th and 2nd 27th and so on. And we got a new platoon commander almost immediately. Lieutenant Hugh Dalby became our platoon commander. But the MacDewey was dreadful. Gave everybody a hell of a shock, and it took a while to recover. It really did. It's very sad.
Not long afterwards, the troops started heading off over the track. B Company had set off first. Were you told you'd be going across the Owen Stanley Mountains?
Yes, we knew it was to be staged in company groups. Companies would follow just as soon as the supply situation made it possible for each company to be accommodated in the mountains. Oh yes, we knew we were going.
And what was the morale like amongst the troops?
Oh, everybody seemed to be quite happy about it. There's a bit of sharpening of bayonets as a show of the sign of defiance, more or less, and everybody checked out their rifles, and there was a lot of disappointment that we only had Lewis guns. Our company did anyway, and we weren't going to take our Vickers guns because they were too heavy and used too much ammunition. So we did a little bit of training on the Lewis guns, but not much. They were awful things. And we had Thompson submachine guns too, and they were dreadful things as well. Yeah, so we went off we went happily off for a mountain walk, and it was quite a walk.
How would you describe the track?
Oh, bloody awful, really. I don't think you can describe it any other way. Well, there was a lot of discussion whether it should be called Kokoda Track or Kokoda Trail. It was my impression over the years that people who had been there didn't call it anything. They just called the site those bloody mountains. And everybody who'd been there knew exactly what they were talking about. But all this kerfuffle about track and trail, I don't think that's worth worrying about.
What was the jungle like, and what was the weather like?
It used to rain, in my experience, at 25 past 11 every day. And when it rained, it really rained. And the whole thing became a floating sort of mountain because of the thickness of the mud, and the quantity of mud was terrible. The jungle was frightening on many occasions. Frightening, absolutely frightening, because you couldn't see. Couldn't see more than from me to you. And it had all sorts of bitey, scratchy things that used to grab out and attack your limbs and that sort of thing. It was very unpleasant. Of course, the trail was the track, as I'm sure I called it when I called it in. The track was probably no more than 6 feet wide at its best. And you had plenty of opportunity to see the jungle on either side. It used to close in on you occasionally. Of course, you couldn't take any alternative route up the hill. The natives used to go up the steepest part and come down the steepest part. And it was very, very exhausting.
Did you have natives with you at that time?
We had natives carrying ammunition and supplies, and they were fantastic. They'd carry the articles of war over and then bring back the wounded, or some of the wounded. And they were extraordinary how they kept doing this day after day. Go up one day and back the next, then perhaps have another a day's rest. Up they'd go to the mountains, come back with the wounded. It was extraordinary. We could not possibly have done that had it not been for the assistance of the natives. No, couldn't possibly have done it.
It took you about 8 days to walk over to Kokoda.
Yeah.
Just tell us what happened when you got there.
Well, we did. My company didn't get to Kokoda. We went just to Deniki, which was the next stop, next station to Kokoda. And we'd been struggling along. It was a struggle up the hills and with all the things. And some interesting things happened. We got a couple of Bren guns that we had to teach ourselves about in lieu of the Lewis, which we took great delight in dismantling and throwing into creeks and that sort of business. And we got Owen guns instead of Tommy guns, and that was the best thing that ever happened. The Owen gun, the Australian gun, was far superior to any other thing that I ever saw anyway at that stage. And what was I talking about? Oh yeah, we got to, we knew that B Company had gone ahead and they were involved in Kokoda, coming and going from there on occasions. And we knew we weren't too far away from it. And it was dark, actually dark, when we got to Deniki, and we were standing there in a group wondering what the hell to do. And Bill Merritt was taking control. He was a little bit rated. And then my mate Rosengren, I heard him yelling out for me down the track. He was so cramped he couldn't possibly move. He was totally, utterly exhausted and cramped. He said, "Will you give us a hand up the hill?" So I had to carry him because he couldn't walk. And when we got to the hill and this group was there, he said, I just got there in time for him to say, hear Bill Merritt say, "And Bert Fry, I want you to take this patrol around there." And by this time I was completely exhausted too, and I just fell in a heap. Just fell in a heap, and I couldn't move either for a while. So I don't know what happened for the next 6 hours, but we woke up and next morning we hadn't been attacked, but it was imminent. We knew that, and yeah, we were only there about 12 hours, I think, and the Japanese came. And I had it was terribly dirty up there, and I had a shirt with a little wallet in the pocket that I'd hung up sometime on a bush to dry, and Don Simonson's platoon was on the left, and suddenly all hell broke loose down there, and Simo's blokes got shoved back, and then they came around our side, and Delby and his mob, including me, got shoved back, and I left my shirt behind with the wallet in it, with photographs in it, and we got shoved back, and Hugh Delby and I and Rosie and one other bloke, we got cut off. We were surrounded by chaps that we could see and we could engage, but we knew we didn't have a big future there. So we didn't have any ammunition much left. No grenades, no anything. Perhaps 5 rounds SAA. SAA, small arms ammunition. And we just had to get out as best we could. So we shot off, and we were 3 days, I think, adrift, trying to find our way back to the battalion. During the course of which time we struck 1 or 2 little skirmishing Japanese, but we really didn't know much about what was going on. We had no food, except we found a deserted native garden, and that had some taro in it, so we ripped the inside out of a tin hat and cooked some of that, and that was never eaten it since. But that's what sustained us, and eventually, Hugh Delby was damn good. He said, "We'll go this way and do this and do that," and eventually we got back. And my mate Ned Bryant, who had been in this similar action, he was the Lance Corporal in charge of the platoon, and which rather intrigued him a bit, because Ned didn't want to be a platoon commander. And we staggered in more dead than alive, and Ned said, "Oh, geez, I'm glad to see you fellas back. It's good to see you again. Now you can have your bloody platoon back." So that was the way Ned saw us. But that was we were just one of the fortunate lot of we four who got shoved off a bit and eventually found our way back without any real worries, or real damage anyway. And then we just went in due course, went into Isharava, followed up.
What do you remember about Isharava?
It wasn't too good.
It was pretty tough?
Oh, it was pretty tough, yeah.
Do you remember being dug in there?
Yeah, we had little holes and dug. It was hard, you know. We didn't have any picks or shovels or anything like that. We just used to scratch our way with bully beef tins and tin hats, if any, and anything that would scratch a bit of one. Of course, they were then necessarily very shallow, and they'd always fill up with water, so every time you got injured, you came out soaked. And it was at this stage that the mountain gun, Japanese mountain gun, made itself known, to me anyway, and its heavy machine gun, the woodpecker. And the Japanese were extraordinarily clever at the way they employed and deployed these weapons, because that mountain gun did an enormous damage to our troops, and the heavy machine gun, called a woodpecker because it sounded boop, 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 very slow. But every time it went off, somebody seemed to fall down, hit or wounded. They were incredible. And this caused a sudden upsurge of interest in foxholes, or slit trenches as we used to call them. And they became a bit deeper, but every time you got into them you still got wet. It was dreadful. We had a period of, I think, 3 or 4 days, and might have been a bit longer, where there was no action at all. We were just there. And the Japanese made no action, and we took no action. Why, I don't know. I'm surprised in hindsight that we didn't patrol, or our mob didn't patrol. Don't know about the infantry companies, the rifle companies. But we didn't do any patrolling. In fact, we did nothing for 3 or 4 days. And then it really started. And about this time, we got Colonel Honour as CO, and about this time anyway, and we were on that's right, we were into this damn, Japanese came in their hordes against us, and we didn't have a lot of people, but we held on there for a while, a couple of days, and all the time we were waiting on the 2nd 14th Battalion, which we knew were due to arrive. And Colonel Ono used to come round and talk to us all and say, look, you've got to stay. You've just got to stay. The 2nd 14th are coming, and you've got to stay until they're actually here. And he was an inspiration, that bloke. Fantastic. And we stayed, and in due course, the 2nd 14th leaned out of the jungle and said, where are the bastards? Let's get into them, which they did. And for another 3 or 4 days, it was a real rowdy sort of noise. There were guns going off everywhere, and people shooting at each other and killing each other and shouting at each other. And there was a hell of a noise. And the 2nd 14th and the 39th Battalion really fought as one unit after a while. And I have no doubt that because of the association of the 2nd 14th and the 39th Battalion at Isharava and further back along the track, that was the cause, the main cause of the lessening of disaffection between the militia and the RAF. And that's where it started, with the 39th and the 2nd 14th, because they reckoned we were pretty good and we reckoned they were pretty good. So it was, love all around. But it was awful. It was awful. And the wounded, of course, were just unbelievably sad to see them. As it says in the books, official histories, if a man got a stomach wound, that was it, he was going to die. And the others, if they were, and the medicos would just fill them up with the stuff, everything they had that would make dying a little easier and a little quicker for them. And this, in a clinical Problems of War, which is the official medical journal of the war, says this. And other people, they got wounded in all sorts of places, and to see them going back across the track, because the track was the centre of everything. If you weren't on the track, you didn't know where the hell you were, or adjacent to it anyway. And they'd be going back along the track, shot through the head, shot through the shoulder or the foot, or had a hand blown off or something. And it was tragic to see them, and to see the natives, the way they looked after them was just fantastic. Just fantastic. Couldn't do enough for them. But the blokes never seemed to complain much. All they seemed to want was a cigarette, if anybody had any cigarettes, or a light for their cigarette. Away they go. Some blokes crawled all the way back. 8 days over mountains. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. But that wasn't too good, and then eventually we got chased out of there. And we just had these actions all the way back through Ura Creek and other places. Before the action really hotted up at Isharaba, we were in a position with Hugh Dalby, and Ned Bryant had his section over there on the right, and there was a bit of a kerfuffle down there, and we thought, what the hell's going on here? And there's bloody silly Ned Bryant, who was my mate. He's put himself behind one of the buttresses of these big tall trees, the buttress trees we used to call them, with great flaring roots. And then put himself behind there and looked at it and he said, I've got a Jap over there behind the next buttress, you see. And so he started to make a move, and he going round and round the tree, chasing the Japanese, until it became impossible for us, who were looking at him, to tell who was chasing who. And eventually we decided that the Jap was chasing Ned. He was about to shoot him. So we had to finish that one off. But Ned was mad. Ned was mad. And then absolutely mad. The silly bugger got himself a couple of days later. He was down in a different position but similar, and I was up at platoon headquarters with Hugh Delby. I heard my name. And I knew it was Ned. He was in big trouble, so I galloped down along the track, and here's Ned. He'd been shot in the left elbow, and he was in a hell of a mess. Gee, he was a tough guy, but getting shot is a hell of a shock. It's a hell of a shock to the people, and Ned was, although he's one of the stronger people, it affected him just the same. So he went off, and Hugh Dell went, right, Bert, go and take over Ned's section. So I went, and I spent a most uncomfortable half a day there with bloody Japanese shooting at me, and I was quite offended that they shot at me. I didn't think that was very fair, because I couldn't see them and couldn't have a shot, but they didn't hit me anyway. So that was finished of Ned. Eventually he joined up, and he'd lost the sight of his right eye as a result of this win. But we had a batman by the name of Harry Shivers, who was an old Englishman. How the hell he ever got into the 39th Battalion, I don't know, because of his age. But he was a nice old fella. He was supposed to be batman to Hugh Delby and me, but I think he was the best looked after batman in our area. Eventually, after the war, he died shortly after the war. Nearly bloody died before that too. But it transpired that he had two complete families. Anyway, he didn't have any real worries this day. You said, go down there and take this message over to that bloke over there. Only about 40 yards. And it was wet, and it was bloody miserable. Oh, bucket of mud everywhere. And Harry said, all right, so away he went, and he got his gas cape on. A gas cape's one of those voluminous things. So away he went, and he'd no sooner cleared out of our sight, the machine gun went off, Japanese machine gun. Oh, that's the end of Harry, you see, poor Harry. And a few seconds later, there was a great thumping noise, yelling and carrying on, and some bloke shot into our position. It was Harry. And he said, the rotten bastard shot me in the ass, and he had 8 bullet holes in his gas cape, and he lived to rear 2 families, so he was pretty lucky. Yeah, so that was it. It was pretty sad. The most tragic thing of the lot, of course, was the wounded. Oh, I used to make you weep. Say that, poor buggers. And Ura Creek was a threatening, dingy, dark place. We got chased out of there too. Some wounded were left there because you couldn't move them. Just couldn't move them.
That would have been hard.
Oh, that's awful.
Having to leave
That's
them.
awful. That's awful. Yeah. But as I said earlier, the medico people,
Wonderful job.
they did extraordinary things with people who were capable of being resuscitated. You know, if a fella got shot through the head, he was not dead until he actually died. But if he got shot through the stomach, as one leading surgeon said, well, we need operating theatre, we need anaesthetists, we need everybody to look after us. We just haven't got them. So we just make them comfortable.
Do you remember the fine speech that Colonel Honour made at Minari when you fell in and had a parade?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. I don't remember a lot of what he says, but I remember
being there.
Remember being there, and I remember the occasion very well. And then we staggered back home, and home. When I say home, back to where we were supposed to go. Home to an infantryman becomes any place. Just happens to be the last little base he had.
Did you go back to Port Moresby?
Oh, no, we didn't. I think we probably went to Koitaki or somewhere. I forget where we went.
Do you remember coming home on leave?
A few days. When we got back there, I think everybody was totally
Exhausted.
physically and more urgently emotionally disturbed.
Did you go to hospital?
Not at this stage, but later on, little while later on, I got dysentery and went to hospital. Mm-hmm. And you remember that wallet I left behind at Deniki? The bloke, when I was in the hospital, came up to me and orderly said, "Are you Fry?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "There's a black American wants to see you at the entrance to the tent." So I went up there and he said, "Are you Fry?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is this yours?" And he produced the wallet. And I said, "Where'd you get it?" He said, "Is that your wallet?" I said, "Yes, thank you." And he just turned and wouldn't say a word. Now, where that came from, I have no idea. How he got it, where he got it, no idea, because there were certainly no Americans of any colour in the mountains with us. So where he got it, I don't know. And we were the last to leave Deniki. And we left in Elavari because the Japanese were there and we were there. So I don't know about that. I've still got the wallet somewhere.
Did you go on and serve at Gona and Buna?
No. When we came back, and I think it was to Koitaki, it was only a few days later that I was called up before the CO and they said, "You've done well," and he said, I want you to go back to Australia to an officer training school. And I understand it was either myself or Larry Downs to do this training school, and it came down in my favour. So I then went back to Australia to Seymour to do this training course, which I qualified for, and on the way back to the unit to Kanunga, we used to go then in those days to get commissioned. Somewhere along the track, my train was going north to Kanunga, and the troops train, the 39th Battalion train, was going south. So I swapped trains and went on leave, went back to the 39th with them, and Colonel Honor called me up and he said, "As from today, Sergeant, you are a private." And I was never charged for not going to Kanunga. I just had to become a soldier, a private soldier, which was good. Yeah.
Well, that concludes this interview, Bert, and I'd like to thank you very much on behalf of the 39th Battalion History Group. We've enjoyed your time. very much. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.